Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Lindy Ruano, and I am with the Disability Tribe Initiative and Eastern Seals of Southern California. Today's live webinar, Alternative Services and Beyond, Self-Determination Program, will be offering Spanish and ASL interpretation. Next slide, please. Para las personas que necesitan o prefieren el español, usted puede acceder a este servicio haciendo clic en el icono con el globo blanco en la parte baja de su pantalla, que dice Interpretation. Después, haga clic en Spanish. Aquí tendrá la opción de silenciar el audio original y podrá escuchar la voz de Jeanette Hernández traduciendo. En el canal de español, si selecciona Mute Original Audio, nada más escuchará al intérprete. Si no hace clic en Mute Original Audio, entonces escuchará a los presentadores de habla inglés al fondo. Our ASL interpreters are Tulip Alfredo and Betty McQuena. They have been spotlighted so they can always be seen throughout the presentation. Depending on your device, this may mean that sometimes you cannot see the presenters. We do apologize for the inconvenience, but we want to make sure that this live meeting and recording can be accessible to everyone. This presentation will also have closed captioning, which you can access using the button at the bottom of the screen. Next slide, please. A few things to know about Zoom before we get started. This meeting is being recorded to allow us to refer back to the discussion today and the input we receive. You can hear and see us, but we cannot hear and see you. Everyone has been automatically put on mute and your cameras are not on. Chat is not activated for attendees. However, presenters will be sharing some information through the chat during the webinar. If you would like to ask a question or provide a comment, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We also ask that you indicate which presenter you would like to send the question to. We have staff monitoring and responding as necessary. Some questions will be answered in real time, or we may ask for your email so that we can follow up with the more thorough answer after the webinar. Si necesita hacer preguntas o comentarios en español, lo puede hacer utilizando la caja que dice Q y A, y lo puede hacer en español. Tenemos personal bilingüe asistiendo. For those of you on a phone or a device, you may not be able to use all of the features we discussed. We will be providing other options for you to access material or ask questions later in the webinar. Finally, at the end of today's webinar, we will be asking you to participate in our post-event survey. Once the webinar is over, a new window will pop open with the survey. Please provide your feedback so we can improve on future events. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Executive Director at California Disability Services Association, Barry Giardini. Barry?
Thank you, Lindy, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today for our latest installment of the Disability Thrive Initiative webinar training series. Today's webinar is Alternative Services and Beyond, focusing on the Self-Determination Program. So grateful to have you all with us and really excited about the presentation today. We'll be focusing on some of the core connection points between alternative services and the Self-Determination Program, focusing on centering the client, having the client be the center of the services, and selecting the services that they need to meet their needs, which we've seen the best of during alternative services, and trying to educate folks on how the Self-Determination Program can work for everyone. Next slide, please, Reese. One more. Thank you, sir. Today's webinar, like I said, is going to cover the introduction to the Self-Determination Program. So if you're not familiar with it, you'll get a nice rundown and explanation on the program. We will also have a presenter talking about translating the Self-Determination program's principles into organizational planning, so providers can get a view on how they can use some of the lessons learned during alternative services as a pathway or a starting off point for the self-determination program. The presenters will cover designing and delivering self-determination program services, give us some insights and some examples on what self-determination program can look like in practice for a provider organization. And finally, we are lucky to be joined later today by the acting ombudsperson from the Office of Self-Determination, and we will introduce Katie Hornberger, the acting ombudsperson, towards the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. And these are our presenters for today. We are joined by an esteemed quartet of presenters who are going to get us through all this great content and this wonderful presentation. We will be joined by Melanie Gonzalez, the Northern California Director for Adjoin, Abby Yim, the Executive Director for Integrated Community Services, Wendy Forkas, the Chief Executive Officer for Adjoin, and finally, Rebecca Leinhard, the Chief Executive Officer for Tierra del Sol. We're very grateful to have you all here today. They're going to do an excellent job providing a wealth of information, and we hope you all enjoy it. With that, I will kick it over to you, Melanie, to start us off with the introduction to the self-determination program. Thanks so much, Melanie. Melanie, we're not getting your audio. Just a second, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for your patience as we sort out this quick technical snafu. We will hopefully have Melanie back in just a moment.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Hey, there you are, Melanie. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. We just had sound check and my mic went out apparently. So I apologize. I'm happy to be here today, and hopefully this information will be helpful for everyone present, and we'll get started. I'm the Northern California Director for Adjoin Services. Prior to that, I actually was an associate director for Regional Center of the East Bay, where I was responsible for helping to roll out the self-determination program. So I'm excited to continue to work with folks in self-determination. Next slide, please. So self-determination, the original self-determination pilot program was started in 1998, many years ago, with a small group of individuals in 5 different regional centers. The initial rollout, or the initial pilot program, was designed to be a 3 to 5 year pilot, but of course it went much longer than that. In 2013, self-determination was written into the Letterman Act, Welfare and Institution Code 4685.8. If anybody wants some bedtime reading, but it couldn't be implemented statewide at that time due to the need for federal approval. So the initial pilot program did not have federal approval and did not qualify, therefore, for waiver funding. So after much back and forth with the federal government, the California finally received federal approval to implement the self-determination program in California. And that was rolled out to a group of 2,500 participants amongst 21 regional centers for a soft rollout of 3 years. So many more folks applied that did not get into the program. But as of 2021, the program has been open to all eligible regional center clients in California. Next slide, please. So what is self-determination? It's essentially a person-centered approach to services. It's all about the person deciding what is important to them and what's important for them to feel happy and fulfilled and live their lives the way they would like to. Next slide, please. So self-determination was founded on 5 basic principles. The individual has the freedom to plan their own lives, to make their own decisions for their lives, has the authority to decide how much money is spent on their services and supports. How money is spent on their services and supports. They have the support they need based on the people that they choose, that they select to help them live, work, and play in their communities. They're responsible for making decisions in their lives and being accountable for those decisions, including the use of public money. And they have confirmation that they're the most important person in their planning, that they're the decision makers for their own life, and that they are a valuable member of their community. Next slide, please. So the traditional service model has been more of a medical model throughout the years, largely due to federal waiver requirements. The service coordinator acts as a medical professional in the traditional world in a lot of aspects, assessing the disabilities and the deficits, prescribing the services and supports that might help the individual overcome those deficits. And based on the treatment, if you would, recommended, the service coordinator selects the services based on the available contracted services, the regional center procedures and policies, and the laws and regulations that govern our service system. They also select the service providers, giving a few choices if those are available, and we know that the choices are kind of slim, especially in some areas. So if the choices are available, providing those, and then determining the volume of services that are going to be authorized. Once the service coordinator authorizes services in the traditional world, they take on more of a governing, policing sort of a role where they're responsible for making sure, for monitoring services and making sure that the rules are being followed and that the individual's making progress. And this is done through routine progress review reports and meetings, audits, reviewing case notes, things to that nature. And then they're responsible for intervening when things aren't working. So when concerns arise or things aren't working, they're responsible for stepping in and making the decision with the IDT team to change that service if it's not meeting the need. Next slide, please. The self-determination program, there are role changes in that program. So instead of the regional center system really driving the services and supports, it's really the individual who drives everything. They're responsible for selecting their team. They're responsible for making sure that they're making the decisions and in what services and supports they're going to receive to help them meet their goals. The focus is really on abilities, not on deficits. It's very, very person-centered in that way. They select services on their person-centered, based on their person-centered plan and the goals that they have identified for themselves that are based on what's important to them in helping to meet those goals. The individual and their chosen support team obtains the services that will help them meet their goals. Those services can be vendored or non-vendored. In the traditional model, all services that are funded must be vendored. So that really limits what can be provided to individuals to help them meet their goals. In the self-determination model, services don't have to be vendored. They can be traditional or they can be non-traditional. And definitely outside the box services and supports are embraced in self-determination. The individual and their support team decides how the money will be spent, including what and how much of each service is needed to make their plan work. The individual and their support team monitors, coordinates, and directs their services and supports to make sure those services and supports are working for them. The regional center is still involved, but primarily for ensuring health and safety of the individual in developing the person-centered IPP based on their person-centered plan, and assisting with developing and adjusting the budget as needed throughout the course of time. If the individual wants the regional center service coordinator more involved, they certainly can request that, that the regional center service coordinator is more involved. And I have experienced quite a few teams that have a lot of service coordinator involvement. Regional center, instead of funding services and supports directly, the regional center sends money to an FMS agency who pays for those services and supports in the self-determination program. Next slide, please. So there are some new roles and terms in self-determination that are very different than in our traditional service model. So some of these new roles and terms are person-centered planning, independent facilitator, financial management service, budgeting, but the individual budget and the spending plan. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick graphic of all the different components and how they work together to support somebody in self-determination. So the person-centered plan is the plan that the individual makes for their life. The individual can choose to have a person-centered plan developed outside of their person-centered IPP, and this can be completed by an individual or an agency that they select, or it can be developed by the individual themselves. If they pay for it, it's funded by the regional center. So that's kind of a plus to have an outsider perspective, and a lot of folks really do appreciate having that. And the independent facilitator, the individual chooses to help them implement their plan. So this can be a paid or unpaid position. If the independent facilitator is managed by the individual and helps as, the independent facilitator is managed by the individual and helps as much or as little as the individual wants them to. If the individual wants to keep their service coordinator as their facilitator, they certainly can do that as well. But this is just an optional component of self-determination that some folks really appreciate. The budget is essentially the amount of money the individual will have to spend on services and supports in self-determination. It starts with the amount of money the regional center spent on services for the person over the last 12 months. And this amount can be increased or decreased if there are unmet needs or a change in circumstances. But in order for money to be added to the budget, the services and supports being considered must be those that the individual qualifies for based on need, and that the regional center would have funded for that person in the traditional system. For example, if the regional center cannot add money into the budget to pay for an independent facilitator, since that service is not funded in the traditional system. The spending plan is essentially how the person will spend the money identified in the budget to pay for services and supports in self-determination. This is the really fun piece of everything, right? You get to think outside the box, and you get to decide what kinds of services are going to help me meet my goals that I wasn't able to access before due to having to select contracted service providers. The spending plan is developed by the person and the people that they choose to help them. And it can include services and supports that are not funded in the service system. But those services and supports must help them meet their person-centered goals. So they can't just purchase anything out there. It has to tie into their person-centered IPP and help them meet their goals. The financial management services agencies, the FMS agencies, the FMS is the only required service in self-determination, and essentially it pays the bills. Depending on the services and supports the person chooses, the FMS also supports with ensuring service providers meet certain qualifications, helps the individual with understanding and following laws that govern employers, and helps the person stay on track with their spending plan so they're not overspending. Services and supports, these are chosen by the person, as we have said, to help them meet their person-centered goals. They can be vendored or non-vendored services. And the contract for the services is really between the individual receiving the services and the provider. And services provided must meet certain federal rules. So the services must be provided in the community. They must support choice and inclusion. So all of those waiver requirements that we hear about for HCBS compliant, they have to be HCBS compliant, excuse me. And I think that is it for my portion. I want to introduce Abby, who is our next presenter.
Hi, everyone. Now that we've learned more from Melanie about what self-determination is, I'm here as a service provider to showcase and share ways to explore the opportunities of self-determination and how to get started with bringing it to an agency before I hand it off to Wendy and Rebecca, who will talk about designing and delivering services and give an example of a business model. We can go to the next slide. And then the next slide too. So first I'll share how self-determination relates to the way services are evolving to catch up with disability rights and justice. And then I'll briefly share a bit about how service providers can use that evolution framing to make business plans that benefit both the people we serve and our agencies. So this visual that's on the screen is something that we created at my agency to share with our staff and the people we serve to give context about how self-determination is really an exciting opportunity, and also to give some history on how disability services have evolved over the years, to really show how self-determination is an amazing opportunity for us as service providers to have a funding mechanism to support inclusive service design. So if we look at this graphic, historically, we'll see that there was once the medical model, which really based services around doing things to people with intellectual disabilities. So we think about institutionalization or medicating people against their will. Then we move to the four, which is the charitable model, which is doing things for people with intellectual disabilities. And so we see that in volunteer caretaking through churches and faith organizations. And it was really the beginning of integration into the community. And now we see that we're really moving into the width of disability services in terms of the evolution. And this is the inclusion model. And that's doing things with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so we see this with inclusive housing. We see this with really the design of HCBS, or the housing and community-based settings rule, and to really think about how we can look at the human rights element of the work that we're doing, which is, as many providers are on the call and people who are really involved in the work, they really came into this work to look at civil rights and how we can really design equitable systems for people with intellectual disabilities. So what's exciting about self-determination and why we wanted to create this graphic for the people that we serve and our staff is to really explore how self-determination can be a way for us to really design inclusive services that are centered on a person's choices, their preferences, what they really want to be doing with their lives. And we got an introduction to that with alternative services that happened during the pandemic. And it was really popular for us to look at really creative ways to design services and do hybridized online learning throughout the pandemic as a way to deliver alternative services. And so it really gave us the beginning of some thinking about what we could do with self-determination in our ability to be creative and be really inclusive in our service design that worked in partnership with the people we serve as we design what services made the most sense for their individual goals. You can go to the next slide. So in thinking about that framing, and that's something that we talked about with our staff and with our the people that we serve around the really exciting opportunities of self-determination to create inclusive services. We thought a lot about now how, as a business or as a service provider, could we really think about what the opportunities were to design something new. So we decided to ask ourselves some questions. And so here are a few that we want to share that could possibly be helpful too for any other providers. So how can we view self-determination as an opportunity to create something new and to be flexible? So as we think about the services that we've traditionally been providing, we've really had to be thoughtful about how can we make sure that they're fundable and that they're services that really meet people's needs. But now with self-determination, we were thinking, oh, there's an opportunity for us to be even more flexible and be able to really tailor and design services that were in the same interest as people were providing services to. So one thing that we thought about is, what is it that we as an agency do or services that we offer that were really popular with the people that we provide services to? So is there a specialty that we could use to really differentiate the services that we offer? So that was another question that we really did and considered. So we decided to build a process around understanding what our specialty is, while also being able to be flexible enough to meet people where they're at. So we can go to the next slide. So here's a few thoughts for preparation steps that an agency can take in order to prepare your organization for success and really explore the opportunities of self-determination. So the first thing that we thought about in terms of understanding what our specialty was and really understanding how to meet people where they're at and design services to meet their interests, we decided to build a survey. So we designed a survey and we interviewed people who receive services from us and asked them what services that they're currently receiving from our agency that they really love. Or are there opportunities for us to design something different or additional to the current services that would really help them to meet their individual goals? And that survey process was really helpful and illuminated a lot of what our differentiator is as an agency, or what it is that people come to us for, from the perspective of our key people, the people we provide services to. After getting that information from the survey, we then decided to build a marketing and strategy plan about what differentiates us from the competition. As Melanie mentioned in her slides, what's wonderful about self-determination is that it really gives a lot of openness for people to be able to use the funding that's allocated to them for different kinds of services. But that also means as a provider that we have to be really clear, because there's more competition around services, about what it is that we uniquely offer. So this is an invitation for us to really think about what marketing strategy we have to really show, what self-determination services we're offering that are different than other providers, or why somebody would want to uniquely come to us. And again, this is an opportunity for us to reflect back on what was successful in alternative services, because it was a testing ground for us to see what people really loved about our services, or what really helped them meet their goals. So just in review, just want to encourage everyone to really look at self-determination as an opportunity around inclusive services and ways to move us more in the civil rights that we're all fighting for. Secondly, if we really think about how we design a business plan, we'll get more into that in a little bit too. How could we really reflect on what services are really popular with people we provide services to through a survey? And then how can we build a marketing and business plan to really differentiate our services? Now I'll hand it over to Wendy, who'll get into more details.
Thank you, Abby. I appreciate that. I'm Wendy Forkis, and I'm the CEO of Adjoin. And I've been in this field, I hate to say it, but over 28 years. And I've actually provided and supported organizations in almost every service type in our system. And I was really fortunate to work with one of the first self-determination individuals who transitioned out of Sonoma Developmental Center many years ago. So thank you for having me here today. So what I'm going to be talking about is kind of helping you guys think differently, just like we have thought differently through the pandemic with alternative services. We've had to look at how we do things differently and really focus on the things that our clients are needing and how we can support them in creative and new ways. So I throw that out there because with alternative services, we had to rethink and think differently about how we provide services to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that's what we need to do here with self-determination. So you need to kind of think about having a business plan and how you want to design those services, because they are going to be different and could be very different than some of the services you've been providing for many years. The other is delivering services. How you're delivering services could be similar, the same, or completely different than what you've been doing previously. differently for many, many years. Next slide, please. So when you're thinking about designing services and looking at providing self-determination services to individuals, we kind of looked at a few items that you guys could think about, food for thought. So Abby was talking about your specialty and identifying that. Where do your strengths lie as an organization? Many of you probably found those strengths over the last couple years because you've really had to pivot and look at what is it that we do well? How can we better serve people in more creative or different ways? So where are your strengths as an organization? Are you already providing individualized services? So have you already started to really focus on individual by individual and what their needs are? And again, with alternative services, that really has been something many providers have had to do over the last few years because of the fact that everybody's receiving services in different ways than they were prior to the pandemic. And if you aren't providing individualized services, do you want to learn how? Because that's what self-determination is all about. Do you have the capacity to grow in new ways? You really want to make sure as an organization that you have the capacity to expand and do things differently, because that's really what it is. It's a different model. It's not even a model, it's a service, and it's very, very specialized to an individual. And so you really want to make sure that as an organization, you are in a position where you would be able to grow your services, to do different service types or different ways of doing services, as well as how you're like billing and tracking the services, because all of those things could be different than what you're doing today. And then the last one, this is really a thought-provoking question. Do you value the needs of those you support over the value of your own programs? So as providers, for example, Adjoin, we have been providing services in the models that are set up through DDS and the regional system for over 38 years. So the question is, do we value that model of service that we've been providing for 38 years more than we value the needs of the people we support? So think about that, because when we talk about self-determination program and services, there isn't a model. There is not a program design. There aren't criteria that you have to have in place in order to provide that service. This is truly something that you could sit down with an individual and create services around the needs of that person, not fall into a model or certain criteria that you need to have in place in order to offer that service to an individual. Next slide. So delivering services. So again, just some things for us to think about as providers that are, again, we want to think outside the box, completely different. The individual receiving the self-determination program services and the person that provides the services decide payment between themselves. So when we're talking about self-determination, there isn't a set rate or set, agreement between you and the person you're providing services to until you both sit down and have that discussion and agree upon what it is you're going to be providing for them. And then you, between the two of you, will work out what that payment is going to be. So again, completely different than what we've been doing for many, many years, okay? Because we have set rates that fall within certain models of services. Here, you're creating an individual service plan for this individual. And so you and that individual be working out how payment of those services are going to look and what the costs are going to be. Services are decided using the person-centered plan and not on system requirements. So I've said that a few times, and I know as providers, it is so hard for us to think outside the box. I actually saw that there was a comment saying, how do we add this service to our vendorization in the chat and questions? You don't. Self-determination services are not vendored services. They are not something that you are going to get vendored with the regional center. So you are creating a new service and you're going to be using the person-centered plan. Okay, so what that person is sitting there saying, these are the supports and services I'm needing and I want you to provide to me. And you're going to work with that individual to decide what is it that they're wanting, what are their expectations, what are their requirements, all of that. So you are not needing to conform or stay in the model of the services that you have vendorized with the regional center. You can do something different and unique and specialize it to the individual you're going to be serving. So I think, again, just really thinking about that when you're thinking about self-determination, really, you can do things completely different than what you're doing today to support somebody, because their needs and their supports could be completely different than what you've been providing or what the system previously had as criteria for that model. The independent facilitator is key. Again, that position or role is really, really essential to help facilitate all of this, all the things that we're talking about. So when we talk about delivering services, that facilitator is there to help facilitate the things that I've been talking about in regards to between the entity, the program, the company, the service, and the individual who's seeking those services and supports. So keeping that in mind as well. So now I'm going to be passing it on to Rebecca Leanhold, who is the CEO of Tierra del Sol. Rebecca.
Thank you, Wendy. What a great presentation, and I'm going to try to bring this home for everybody. We've heard the nuts and bolts of self-determination from Melanie. Thank you very much. And Abby really helped us move through what it really looks like to have a systems change, to move from a agency-directed type of approach to the evolution of really hearing from the people who are being served and what are they really hoping for, and moving our organizations from agency-driven organizations to person-led. And Wendy really did a great job at setting us up for questions that we really need to ask ourselves. Are we ready? Do we have the capacity to change? Do we want to change? And so as we look at the example, I just want to kind of bring all of that to kind of a full circle as we look through an example. I really want to make note that we're not there yet as Tierra del Sol. We're navigating that evolution from being an agency-driven service to a person-led service. We serve over 700 individuals. We have been invested in path planning and person-centered planning model, but we're still very on the fringes of really what it means to be a person-led service. So I'm hoping that that helps to set the tone for the example that I'm going to share with you today. So as you can see, we've picked our college to career program. We reference it as Nexus. You're going to even see the words curriculum in this map, in this diagram, because when we launched this program in 2007, it was a flood of individuals who were able to manage a college level life and college level curriculum, but that were thirsty for the supports and services that were needed to help them successfully obtain the educational degree that they wanted. And so we were really thrilled about this program when we launched it again in 2007. And we developed this roadmap thinking about how would we help individuals, how would we support individuals through going from I want to go to college to successfully finishing college. And more than that, launching into a career for themselves in whatever they've chosen, whatever field they've chosen. So we did a lot of work on developing a full curriculum for this Nexus model, discovery to education phase to practicum phase. All of these phases were entrenched in person-centered planning. Even though it was a program and it has a clear design to it, you can't go to college without your own plan. It has to be person-centered, it has to be person-led. But there were still really a lot of aspects to the program that felt like a program. It had a 6-hour day to it, still does, still very effective for many people. But when we started to have requests for this program through self-determination, we had to stop and take a deep breath and really drive and be intentional about the decisions that we were making for people who wanted these services. We had to ask ourselves, were they wanting all of the services? Did they really want the path planning services when perhaps they already came to wanting Nexus services with a fully designed person-centered plan? Could we break apart those services? It's not a typical college support program where we're not just sitting with somebody in their college class. It really is a college to career service. And so we really needed to pause and really think, what are the purchase options for people? And I think this is important too for providers to understand that what you're providing through the regional center services might be really innovative and cutting edge, but it's okay for you to intentionally stop and ask yourself, well, what part of these services would you do different? Or what part of them would you not do if they weren't part of your kind of pre-designed program plan? You can see here by the example that we've kind of thrown out there that some people are actually purchasing our services just as they would through the daily rate in a 1 to 3. And I noticed some questions in the Q&A about can you purchase services that are ratio based, or do they all have to be individually based? And actually, people are still able to purchase ratio-based services if that's what meets who they are as an individual. And there are college students who actually want to still be with other college students and who want to meet up at the Freudian sip and engage with their coach on campus with other students and so forth. So that's okay. People are purchasing our Nexus services through that daily rate. But not everybody wants to do that. So we are having some individuals who say, well, I want pieces of it. I have my plan in place. And so I don't necessarily need to go through all of the discovery phase. I really have an idea of what I want to do with my education, but I want to piece together various pieces of your model. And so we do offer that. We offer that in a per hour rate, but as an organization, we had to think to ourselves, was there a minimum capacity that we had to come to? What was our business model around self-determination so that we could continue to keep alive? As you can see, Tierra's been, with the logo behind me, Tierra's been in business for 50 years. And people are asking for our services because they're hoping that we're going to be in business for another 50. And so you do have to think about what the business model you want around the services that you're providing. Even though they're individually based, there's still a business model that surrounds each of those. So for us, it was a minimum of 6 hours. When we thought about staff and the crisis that we're all experiencing in service delivery and staff retention, recruitment and retention, we felt like we couldn't do a model with less than 6 hours a week. So you can see that model there on the screen as well. And then, as Wendy said, learning from how delivery of services really worked through what could be classified as alternative services or remote services or so forth. We really found that in this last year, we've had people successfully graduate college through COVID. We have people who are getting their BA degrees and their AA degrees and their certificates. But through the alternative services, we were able to really do that based on a much more creative strategy. Instead of having a solid where you're providing 30 hours of service for each person each week, people's hours went up and down throughout the semester. So we built a model for our Nexus program, driving towards that, understanding that that life fluctuates and that it's not a per week, per day type of service model, but it could potentially be a per month type of service model. So around midterms, potentially even around spring break, maybe you want to try to find how to get a job during spring break. So again, that concept that life can fluctuate, so should our services. So you can see that we've developed a monthly model to try to help capture the fluctuation of those life services. And again, all of this, and I'm hoping that you hear, is that we're all evolving. That when people come to us and say, I want to purchase this service as if it's an off-the-shelf service from the regional center, we need to be intentional about how in ourselves to ask, let's stop. Let's look at that person-centered plan and let's make sure that what they think they're buying is actually meeting the needs of that person-centered plan. And if not, how can we help them with a purchase package, a design package that really meets their needs and also meets the capabilities that we have to offer to meet those individuals' needs. So before I end, that's kind of a deep dive into kind of what it looks like, a little bit of boots on the ground. And again, remember, please note that we're still navigating that evolution from being really wedded to our program designs and kind of the thoughtfulness and the innovation in those designs, and really knowing that the move into self-determination really will thrust us into this really person-led services for this organization. And we're really excited about that, but it really requires intentional decisions on a day-to-day basis. So before I end, I wanted to have a video, and it would be the next slide or whatever it is, of just one gentleman who is trying to navigate his college world through the Nexus self-determination kind of model that I just described. He's going to use the word workshops in that. And I know for you and for me, if any of us have been in the field long enough, nobody wants to hear the word workshops. What you're going to see is we've really pivoted our services, and when he mentions the word workshops, it's all of these other kind of really rich value-based sessions or workshops that we may have remotely or in person, so that when he launches from his educational support plan into his internship and then into his career, he's built also an additional base of skills and supports with that. So when he mentions the words workshops, that's what he means by that, is that he's picking and choosing kind of from this wide array of opportunities throughout the week or throughout the month to bolster his skill sets and his knowledge and in kind of the general career-based world. So I'm just going to ask to launch, and this is Max, and it's quick and it's endearing, and he's doing great.
Hello, Max. Thank you for joining us. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am at Pierce College and I am studying music at Pierce College.
Awesome. And can you share with us how self-determination is working for you?
That it's helping me get through college.
Okay. Can you give us an example of maybe more choices that you have through self-determination?
Joining workshops.
Okay. With regard to the workshops and how you're using the services, who does the scheduling, or how do you do the scheduling?
It's with the coach as to how I find the workshops.
Okay. So Max, can you tell us an example of a choice that you're able to make in self-determination?
Joining workshops and scheduling the class that I'm taking.
Okay, perfect. And do you have any tips or anything that you would like to recommend to people who are looking into self-determination?
That could help you get through college.
Okay, thank you, Max.
So that was Max, and again, he's enrolled at a local college and university, college here around his area, and he's using self-determination to not only support him in his college life, but also in developing all of those other skill sets and supports that one needs to go from being a successful student to a successful career employee. So thanks, Max, for that. And at this point in time, it is my great pleasure to introduce Katie Hornberger. And she is the newly appointed Self-Determined Program Ombudsman. Oh, I've never said that right, so I'm not going to say it right again. So Katie, I'm just going to hand it over to you, and thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you for having me today. I'm the acting Self-Determination Program Ombudsperson, and it is an awkward word. I am the first to admit. And we've just in the last month opened the office of the Self-Determination Program Ombudsperson. In the budget that just was signed in July, it called for starting this office. And it's really an opportunity to improve the program. And I'm really excited about it. And we're going to talk more at the Lunch and Learn on Friday about it. But I want to hear the good stuff that's happening out there in self-determination so we can replicate it. I also want to hear stuff that's not working so that we can improve upon it. And so on the slide right here, we've got our website. On the website, we also have an intake form that you can complete. And then we've got my email address up and my phone number. It's toll free. And many of you may remember me. I worked at Disability Rights California for many, many years. And so I've been really involved with the self-determination program. For all of these years, worked on lots of committees trying to get it up and going. So I'm excited to see it really happening for families. And I'm hearing from lots of folks like our last speaker who've really been able to do some exciting things. And it's really, I think, nice to hear how self-determination is really helping him participate at Pierce College and really work toward his goals in a really important way. So I'm excited about it as an alternative to the traditional service delivery, but really need to hear from people so that we can improve the program and make more people able to join it and reduce the time that it's taking for people to get into the program, because I think that's one of the barriers that we've seen. So once again, reach out to me with good and bad, eager to hear it all. And then the next slide. We've also got some resources that I think are really important. One of those is the link to the Self-Determination Program website, just in general. And that's where you can find information about your person-centered plan, about spending plans. It also has the FAQ, the frequently asked questions document. And that's a document that DDS updates. So it contains really good current information about utilizing the program. So I encourage folks to check out that website. We've also got the link to the Home and Community-Based Services Final Rule. So I know we talk a lot about the final rule, and it's really important in the self-determination program because although other programs have a couple more years to come into compliance with it, in self-determination, all of our services have to be in compliance with the final rule. So it's, I think, really important that we understand what that means. And so we also have the link to the regional centers. So if you need more information about your local regional center, and you can figure out on that at that website which regional center you belong to based on your address. We also have the link to my office, the Self-Determination Program Ombudsperson office. That's there. And once again, there's my email, easy to remember. And you can also email DDS, the folks that work on self-determination, and their email is even easier than mine. It's just sdp@dds.ca.gov, and they can help answer your questions also. They've got a really good staff that has been working on implementing this program for many years now. So those are some important resources, and I encourage people just to bookmark those so they can get back to them easily.
Thanks so much, Katie. Really appreciate the information. Really excited to have you in the role. I'm going to ask you to stay on screen now because we've had a flurry of questions coming in. Of course, there are a lot of questions around self-determination. So I'm going to invite you to stick around as well as have our presenters come back on. So Melanie, Abby, Rebecca, and Wendy, if you could. We're also going to be joined by Tim Travis from the Department of Developmental Services to answer some questions, which will be facilitated by Will Sanford of Sanford Creative and Consulting Services, one of the consultants on the Disability Thrive Initiative project. So Will has been grabbing some questions that came in through the Q&A, and he's going to prompt a nice roundtable conversation for a few minutes. So Will, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Barry. And again, thank you all for a great presentation. It's always, exciting to learn more about self-determination as we go along. And Katie, as you've just joined us in your former role in the OCRA, I know you have a lot of experience with conservatorship. There were a number of questions that came up with how does conservatorship and STP sort of interplay as far as decision-making and control to make that one work?
Yeah, so, when I think about conservatorships, I think about them in the respect that they are supposed to really assist people in making decisions. And I think they can be used in very negative ways. And unfortunately, that's often what we see is where they really, the conservator really takes away any and all decision-making authority from the person with a disability. I think a better way to use them is to really enable people to make decisions and use a supported decision model with them. And so in self-determination, the person with the disability is still the person in charge. And depending on the type of conservatorship and what powers they might have, that the conservator may be the person signing legal documents, for example, but it should all be done with an eye toward what does the person want. Because remember, regional center services in their entirety are voluntary. And so the person with a disability has to want to participate in them. And so, in self-determination, we still need to keep that perspective on the person with the disability, even if the legal signatory is the conservator.
Thanks, Katie. It's one of those trying to get short answers. Tim, another question that came up was related to the financial management service and their sort of role as potentially a gatekeeper, or how do people get paid through that system? What are the options from a financial management service perspective?
So basically with the financial management service providers, they operate on 3 different models. There is the bill payer model, the sole employer model, where the participant is the employer of record. And then there is the co-employer model, where the participant and the FMS share that employer responsibility. So it would be dependent on the model that the participant selected as to how individuals would be paid by that FMS.
Awesome. Melanie, when you're running through your laundry list of all the players, how does the independent facilitator sort of come to be? How do you find one? Do you have to hire one? Who can it be? Who can't it be?
Sure. So the independent facilitator can be any person that the participant chooses. However, there are some rules with independent facilitators in that if the independent facilitator is a paid facilitator, then they must have training in self-determination and must have training in person-centered planning. And they cannot be a parent of a minor, and they cannot be a spouse of the participant in self-determination. So it's really, other than those few rules, it's pretty much wide open. It's the person's choice and who they decide they want to help implement their plan.
Cool. So this one's sort of a toss-up between Rebecca, Abby, and Wendy. One of the questions was really, historically, we've had a menu of services that people could sort of choose from based on what they knew or know. So how do you really view for your organizations the ability to offer sort of very different services that in a sense are off menu or different? And how are you going to, in a sense, advertise or work with folks in that arena?
I'll start and then tag in Abby and Wendy to that. It really starts with that plan. It really starts with the person-centered plan, and really good planning will have potentially a lot of visuals to that. It will open up kind of really what the hopes and dreams of that individual are, and really kind of do backwards planning from there. So instead of starting with a menu of services that really kind of drives things in a linear direction in that way, a really good person-centered plan starts with those hopes and dreams of that individual and really develops the visuals around that. And then how do you pull those back into where you're at with the here and now? And in many respects, those menu of options then with the here and now are going to be very different, because they're not going to have the tone of, well, I want to purchase this day service or that employment service. It will say, I want a job doing, something in the field of my choice, or I want to have friends that value who I am as an individual, or it may, it'll have all of those kind of elements to that. So that's how you can help to start to move your menu of services, by really investing in those person-centered plans, or at least that's my opinion about that. And so Abby, I see that you've unmuted, so I'll tag you in at this point in time too.
Great. And I think similar to the process that you want to walk through with the people you serve as a business too, doing some organizational identity soul searching. And what I mean by that is to be really clear on what is that you offer. So just because the person that you're providing services to, might have an interest, let's say in equestrian services, that's not ICS's specialty, or we don't have the expertise in that, but we would happily connect that person to equestrian services. So what we had to do too is, as we were thinking about these services, recognize that as a provider, we don't have to be all things to the people we provide services to. We're trying to push for integration and inclusion. And so really our role is to be that bridge or a connector, and to really to help with identifying other services outside of us if we don't offer it in-house. Also being able to do that identity searching had helped us to really define what it is we could specifically offer that was mission aligned, made sense in terms of our business offerings, our staffing, financial kind of a good sense. And then from there, we were able to really define what self-determination services we could offer to the people we provide services to.
And I'll just add that for, marketing, I think it was one of the things that Will said. And I think you got to market in generalized and not specific, I guess is probably how I would look at it as an organization. If, like Abby was saying, what's our specialty? For example, with Adjoin, we do a lot of living services. That's definitely one of our specialties. If I were to be marketing that for self-determination, that's what I would say, is we have a lot of experience and strength in helping people live in the community. I wouldn't call it supported living. I wouldn't call it ILS. I would be more general about the service that we provide, because when you're meeting with the individual, that's when you're really going to decide what their supports they're going to need to live in the community, and have that discussion on, can we do that? And if we can, what does it look like? And what's the agreement going to be cost-wise and things like that. So I would just also encourage people to think generally instead of very, very specifically.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies. So Tim, back to you. One question. I know in the history, what Melly went through, the self-directed program that started 20 plus years ago, it wasn't federally funded or supported. So people had, in a sense, broader choices. What are sort of some of the limits that we face in self-determination? Where do they come from? Is it the state? Is it the federal government? Is it the regional centers? I mean, do people have unlimited choices, or are we limited in some fashion?
Yeah, so the services that are purchased in the self-determination program must be eligible for federal matching funds, sometimes be called Medicaid eligible. So the federal government does have guidelines about which goods and services can be purchased. So for example, budget funds could not be used to purchase a car or for routine maintenance, but budget funds could be used to make disability-related modifications to a car if it meets the person's IPP goals or need, and there is not a generic resource that is available.
So there's clearly limits that people have to live within. So it's not a wide open as, any choice is possible. There are limits that people have to be aware of. And that's really important for all of us to sort of recognize. So Melanie, again, as we go through this, what's the sort of, if you had to go steps 1 through 5 that someone has to go through in order to get into self-determination? What are those steps that they sort of need to follow?
So there's no one roadmap for everyone. It's based on the individual, what their needs are, what their preferences are, how they want to get there. But there are some components that have to be achieved. So there has to be a person-centered IPP. The person-centered plan is optional outside of that, but the person-centered IPP has to be in place. There has to be a budget. There has to be a spending plan. And there must also be an FMS provider. So the individual must sign up with an FMS provider. And so once all those components are achieved and their teams meet and finalize everything, then they can officially transition into self-determination.
Awesome. And just one piece on that is that everybody does have to attend a regional center orientation or an orientation. Sorry, I just sort of add that piece. That was the question I was aiming for. I was hoping you'd get there to do that. So Katie, as the ombudsperson office, which is brand new, created, literally, 4 months ago, as far as that, is their role a broad scope role, or can they really get down and help on an individualized basis?
Right. So it's actually both. And so for individuals, we may be able to assist with individual problems. So for example, people have reached out to me thus far and said, I don't know how to sign up for an orientation. And I know there's a Q&A, there's a question in the Q&A about the orientation is really the first step in the process. And that is still a required first step. But, depending on your regional center, finding one, getting signed up could be hard. So I was able to assist people with that. In other situations, there's been a dispute or a misunderstanding, and I'm able to facilitate solutions and dialogue between the regional center and the individual. Some cases, though, the problem that they bring to me is their individual problem, but what it really is an indication of a larger systemic problem. And so, unfortunately, I'm not able to resolve it for them because what that really is going to require is for a larger look at a policy decision in the program. And so the ombudsperson does both that individual and that large scale looking at, are there policy decisions that we need to make for the program?
So does that want to, but again, you're not going to necessarily get into the level of an individual, fair hearing, et cetera.
Nope, I'm not. My days of representing people in fair hearings are over. And I'm not going to be going to people's planning meetings. And I know people would like me to do that. Not in that level of it involved in there. Really sort of trying to look a little big picture, but can do some individual assistance.
Awesome. Yeah, that was sort of that question. And again, for those on the webinar, this was sort of a last minute. We're a little quicker on our presentation than we expected. So I want to thank the panelists again for all jumping on, and Tim and Katie for joining us also to answer those questions. And we're going to turn it back over to Barry to wrap us up.
Yeah, thank you, Will, and thank you certainly to our presenters, to Tim and Katie for jumping on there and answering some questions. I think we recognize there are a number of questions in the Q&A that we did not get to today, but hopefully some of the resources that Katie shared will be helpful. We will as well, through the Disability Thrive Initiative, share as many resources as possible to try to help people learn more about the program. Reese, if you could pull back up the slides, please. Thank you. And here's the link to those resources. I want to also just invite you all. I know there were, like I said, lots of questions still from different segments of the community. Please come join us on Friday when we'll be hosting our Lunch and Learn, which is a follow-up conversation to this webinar presentation. We're going to be joined by our presenters as well as DDS, and Katie, the acting ombudsperson, will be there as well. So we will have another opportunity for you to engage and ask questions in a less formal setting, where hopefully we can get a little bit more dialogue and back and forth in that way. The Lunch and Learn will be held on Friday in 2 days from noon to 1 p.m. You can register at the link on the page lunchandlearn.disabilitythriveinitiative.org. And that is the best way to do that, and highly recommend and hope to see many of you there for that conversation. We also will post everything from today's webinar, and you can access all the previous resources from our prior Disability Thrive Initiative webinars on our website, disabilitythriveinitiative.org. You can go there to sign up for email updates. You can go there to request technical assistance with alternative services, and we will help you out with any questions you might have. So I encourage and recommend everyone to go to our main website, which is our primary hub for information for the Disability Thrive Initiative. Next slide, please. I'd also like to invite everyone to join us for our next webinar, which will be in December. It is a continuation of our latest series, Alternative Services and Beyond, and it will be focused on resources for the disability community to thrive. As we are coming to the end of this calendar year, we will hopefully highlight some of the best resources that folks have shared and some of the key themes that we've seen throughout the course of the past year of alternative services to try to help the community continue to thrive through this time and well into the future. And so hopefully you'll be able to join us for that Wednesday, December 8th from 3 to 4:15. You can register at the link on the page. I think it'll be dropped in the chat as well. And certainly hope to see you there for that one. Next slide, please. And that's it. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank again our presenters. I hope that you learned a little bit about the self-determination program, got a glimpse into some of the core philosophies and benefits to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Hopefully see the bridge between alternative services, where we've focused on meeting people where they are during this pandemic and providing necessary and desired services, and how that self-determination may be a continuation of that into the future. So thank you all for being here today. I want to thank our interpreters, Betty and Tulip, as well as Janelle. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Hopefully we'll see you on Friday at the Lunch and Learn. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and take care.